Hello, everyone. Welcome to Justice for All's Justice in Ramadan conference, our first panel of the day on the Uyghur crisis and our responsibility. Today is Saturday, May 9th, and I'm Aiden Anwar, your moderator for today. I currently serve as the Save Uyghur campaign manager, and I'm excited to introduce your esteemed guest for today's panel. So our first guest today is Ms. Luisa Griva. Ms. Luisa Griva is Director of Global Advocacy for the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Previously, Ms. Griva was Vice President for Programs in East Asia, Director at the National Endowment for Democracy, with past experience at Special Olympics International, the Corporation for National and Community Service, and the United Nations Development Program. She's an experienced nonprofit advisor and an expert on human rights in China, having traveled and worked in China since 1980. Her first visit to East Turkestan was in 1988. She currently also serves as Washington Fellow for CSW, an advocacy group promoting freedom of religion or belief for all peoples and faiths. Ms. Griva has served on the Amnesty International USA Board of Directors, the Virginia Advisory Committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, the International Advisory Committee of the Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, and the Liberties Promise Board of Directors. She is the author of several book chapters on ethnic issues and human rights in China, and has testified before Congress on democracy in Asia. Our second speaker and panelist for today is Dr. Olsi Jazahi. He is a Canadian-Albanian historian who has specialized in the history of Islam, nationalism, and religious reformation in Southeastern Europe. His interests cover nationalism, radicalism, religious and ethnic identities in the Balkans. He holds a fairly negative attitude against Western powers led by the US, especially their policies and influence on Albania. This is probably one of the reasons why the Chinese regime invited him as one of the reporters on the prearranged, quote, visit in East Turkestan to tell the world via these reporters that concentration camps are just a false propaganda of the West. And last but not least, we have Brother Mehmet Tohti. Mehmet Tohti is originally a university teacher at Kashgar Normal University before his exile in 1991. He is a prominent Uyghur rights activist and campaigner in Canada and worldwide. Currently, he is working as executive director of Toronto-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, and he was one of the university's student leaders of the first ever Freedom March organized by Uyghur students in Urumqi in 1985. He has played an active role in the formation of various Uyghur organizations worldwide and worked tirelessly in promoting of democratic rights of Uyghur in East Turkestan, which China calls as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region since 1955 under the Chinese occupation. He worked as a special representative of the World Uyghur Congress to the European Union in Brussels, Belgium during 2010 to 2012. And during this time, he has campaigned and played a crucial role in introducing European Parliament resolution for the demolition of 2,000 years old Kashgar city by the Chinese government. He has testified twice at European Parliament and 3 times at the Canadian House of Commons, and he has been interviewed by major news outlets globally. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. We're really looking forward to our discussion today on a situation that still much of the world sadly does not know about, or maybe does not know enough about, and what their responsibility is and what they can do from their homes. And we are really, again, looking forward to hearing your expertise, your experiences, and what you guys know about the situation and what people can do to help. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off with asking Mehmet some questions, given the fact that he himself grew up in East Turkestan and went through series and saw things, and also has been an activist for many years. Brother Mehmet, if you could please give us an overview of a bit of your experience and how the situation has impacted you and your family, and we can go from there. You're currently muted. Brother Mehmet, can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you so much. This is for introducing one of the horrendous crime that Chinese committing against Uyghur people in East Turkestan to a broader audience. And we are talking about one of the most serious issues since Second World War, after the Jewish Holocaust. And now, almost 4 years, I have not heard any voice from my mother, who is 78 years old, if she's alive, and all of my 37 other direct or extended family members have disappeared. And this is not only my story, this is the story of all exiled Uyghurs around the world. And so this is one of the most important issues today. And basically, Chinese government is rewriting the definition of genocide, which was written in 1947, incorporated with the UN documents. So we are talking about the disappearance of millions of people, incarceration of millions of people in concentration camp, displacement of people from their homes, from their communities, separation of children, and the forced organ harvesting, slavery labor. And we are talking about cultural and the religious ban of one ethnic group. And we are talking about the digital control in Orwellian state. So this is one of the most horrendous crime which is unfolding before the watchful eyes of international community that is happening for Uyghurs.
So you mentioned that China is rewriting the definition of genocide. Are you referring to what you just mentioned now, where you're saying that they're using unprecedented forms of surveillance and other crimes against humanity to do what they're doing, or do you want to add to that?
In 1945, Polish jurist Raphael Lemkin, he characterized genocide means the destruction of ethnic group, not necessarily immediate destruction of a nation, except done by mass killing of all members of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundation of life of national group. The objective of such a plan would be the disintegration of political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and economic existence of national group, and the destruction of personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of individual belongs to such a group. This is the definition adopted by UN. And if we look at the current policy of the Chinese government, now we have to include the digital control, organ harvesting, and surveillance, control of the mood and activity of individual and the entire ethnic group day and night, 24/7. So Chinese government is basically rewriting the definition of genocide.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting point to make, because I think oftentimes this issue is usually coined as a cultural genocide. Do you think that coinage is maybe an understatement, or more can be said to that? What do you think of the coinage of the situation being called a cultural genocide?
If you look at the main UN document, especially the Article 6 of Rome Statute, the genocide means one of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. As such, number one, killing of members of the group. Number two, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group. Three, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Number four, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group. Number five, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now we have to add the rape, the state-sanctioned rape of entire ethnic group, and the DNA testing, and the racial profiling, and the organ harvesting, and the digital control. That's the reason I have to stress more and more about the new definition of the genocide that's being written by the Chinese government, in addition to 5 parts already accepted by UN documents, especially the Chinese government ratified in 1983, I guess it was April 18th, the Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The Chinese government is part of this UN convention, but Chinese government is still committing the genocide for entire ethnic group of Uyghurs, Kazakh, and others, with systematic state policy by using all available resources, not only state powers, just like judicial power, military power, and other powers, at the same time, including the high-tech surveillance and the digital control. So China, basically, this is the new definition of genocide written by the Chinese government that is unfolding for Uyghurs.
Thank you for that. I found that interesting because multiple times, I think when people, at least from my perspective, when I hear the term cultural genocide, it just seems like it's only an attack on culture and religion. And I think there's a lot of pushback from people saying it's perhaps safer to not say full-on genocide or ethnic genocide because we don't have clear evidence, or that massive groups of people are being killed off, because that is apparently one of the requirements. So given that, I'm also opening the floor to Louisa or Olsi. What do you guys think about the coinage of it just being called a cultural genocide, or is for now, do you guys think it is a safer method to continue calling it as such, or do you think that definition should also be expanded and made sure that it encompasses the reality of what's happening on the ground in East Turkestan?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yes. For human rights advocates, the important thing is making a case that an authoritative body should declare crimes against humanity or genocide is just an opinion. The only bodies that can make a finding that a genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes is occurring is a duly constituted authoritative body. And the Uyghurs have been crying out, why hasn't the UN conducted an investigation? Why hasn't the Security Council taken it up? Where is there an international or a national court that could make such a determination? Everybody's afraid of the power of the Chinese government. Even an independently constituted judicial panel, like a commission of jurists. Nobody has yet taken this up, despite the fact that Uyghurs are asking for this kind of authoritative decision made by lawyers based on a public body of evidence that they then have collected to show. Now, Mehmet or I or any of you can easily make that case, but we're only suggesting. I think the reason people use cultural genocide is that it has no legal definition, so it is a description, and you can't be accused of getting ahead, of making a claim that is not proven. And so it is, in that sense, very suitable, because you're not damaging your credibility as somebody who bases your claims on international human rights standards.
All right, thank you for that insight, Ms. Louisa. I will kind of wanted to hear a bit about Dr. Olsi's trip to East Turkestan. You had mentioned, Brother Olsi, I had watched some of your videos and some of the clips that you had recorded when you went to these camps, and you had mentioned that before this visit, you were a bit skeptical about China's claims, and you wanted to see it for yourself, and China invited you to come on these stage tours. So could you give us an insight and talk a little bit about your story, about what you saw during your trip?
Yes, Aydin, you're right. I went to China in August 2019 with a good intention of proving the Americans wrong and the West wrong, because I'm very suspicious of what the United States does throughout the world. Here in Albania, we have a coronavirus dictatorship being backed by the US Embassy. And as you can understand from my background, my honest desire was to help the Chinese. And for this reason, I applied at the Chinese embassy here in Tirana, Albania. I told them I want to know what is going on in Uyghuristan, Xinjiang, Dogo Turkestan. And because I wanted to discover myself, because I was thinking that this is some kind of fake jihad that the Americans were trying to do against the Chinese. However, after going to East Turkestan, or the autonomous Uyghur region of Xinjiang, I found out that unfortunately the Americans were right, and the things were even worse than I had imagined them. As you have probably seen from my videos on my YouTube channel, we were a group of around 20 foreign journalists. We were only 2 from Europe. The others were from Asia and these stans and Russia that surround China. And my desire when I went to Xinjiang was to discover myself and even to produce a documentary and to prove to the world that the whole propaganda about the Uyghur issue is a fake issue. However, after going there, I understood that we were guinea pigs. We were being used by the Chinese authorities, who paid for our trip, paid for our hotel. But these people, what they did is that they had designed some of these concentration camps or mass detention centers, or we can call them anything. The Chinese call them vocational training centers, as a concentration camps to de-Islamize the Uyghurs. So in my visit that I paid to the Aksu concentration camp in Wensi County and in Kashgar, what we discovered was that the Chinese authorities, they were doing a massive religious persecution, de-Islamization, massive indoctrination of Uyghurs. The Chinese were treating the Uyghurs like Hitler was treating Jews during Second World War. Before visiting the concentration camps, Chinese authorities and the information office of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, they delivered to us a number of lectures because the Chinese authorities, they wanted us as foreign journalists to convey to us the Chinese perspective on Uyghurs and the Muslims of East Turkestan. And during these lectures, our Chinese friends told us in few words that Islam is a terrorist religion from which China have to get rid of, that these Uyghurs and other Turkic people who live in East Turkestan, they are not natives, but they are immigrants, that Xinjiang has historically belonged to the Chinese, that these Uyghurs, before being Muslim, they were Buddhists, and they had to return back to Buddhism, that Islam was forcefully imposed on Uyghurs by the terrorist Turks and the primitive Arabs. And in few words, the language that the Chinese were using in order to describe their Muslim citizens was a very racist language, Islamophobic, and I would even call it fascist. And the lectures that we had shocked us very much. And as I've shown even in my videos, I have made many debates with our Chinese friends when I was in Xinjiang. I told them, I mean, you are supposed to be a socialist in the communist country. And according to Marx, the proletarians, they have no nation, they're all brothers. But the version of history that you are propagating here for us is a Han imperialist version. And moreover, you are treating Islam as being an enemy religion. But we, most of us journalists who were in this trip, we were Muslims, people coming from United Arab Emirates, coming from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from Turkey, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, and what have you. And we told them, okay, we understand that you do not respect Uyghurs because you see them as invaders, but don't you feel that this is going to sound very bad for us as foreign Muslim journalists? The Chinese understood their stupidity, but then the greatest conflict that we had with our Chinese guests came when we visited the concentration camps. So in few words, what the Chinese were doing in Xinjiang, they were and are treating East Turkestan, Xinjiang, as an occupied territory. In December 2018, I visited Palestine, West Bank, and I saw the nightmare that Muslims suffer under Israeli occupation in Israel. But believe me, the situation in Xinjiang was even more horrible. The control was even more high-tech, and moreover, the Uyghurs, they didn't have the freedoms that Palestinians have. Because we know, for example, Israelis, they bulldoze, they kill, they destroy mosques, they have occupied Palestine and what have you. But at least people are free to eat halal food in West Bank and Gaza and to pray to Allah. And some of them, they have even guns to resist the Israeli occupation. But the control in Xinjiang was unimaginable. I mean, even George Orwell's 1984 novel cannot compare what we saw. It was a very high-tech control. And moreover, what the communist authorities of Xinjiang were doing to Uyghurs was that they were trying to forcefully brainwash and de-Islamize them. In these concentration camps that we visited, we saw that if a lady, let us say sister, will be like you, who have a hijab, she will immediately be declared an extremist. She will be arrested and will be sent to these concentration camps. She will be separated from her father, from her kids, from her husband. She will be forced to remove her hijab, will be forced to eat pork, and will be prohibited from being a Muslim. And a condition for you to come out of this concentration camp is that you have to renounce your ethnic identity. Probably you have seen in the videos that I shoot inside the Aksu concentration camp. We were talking in Turkish to these Uyghurs, and they were understanding us. And these poor religious prisoners, they were afraid to respond in their language. They were responding to us in Chinese. Because what the Chinese are doing with Uyghurs is a massive religious and ethnic genocide. They are forcing the Uyghurs to forget their Turkic language, their Turkic history, their identity. They are destroying their family relations. And what is most important, that the Chinese told us during the lectures that we had, but even during the visit that we had, the Chinese perceive Islam as a lethal enemy for China. For people who have followed my articles after I came from East Turkestan, I wrote an open letter to the Muslim Ummah where I explained to the Muslim Ummah what they can do to save the Uyghurs. And when I wrote this article for Daily Sabah, I was attacked by the Chinese ambassador in Turkey, in Ankara, and I responded to him. And a summary of what I told to him is, if you want to resolve the Uyghur issue, you have to tolerate Islam and Turkic identity. Because what I told to our Chinese friends is that China cannot survive and cannot go on with what it is doing in Xinjiang by declaring Islam an enemy. Because 1/5 of our planet is Muslim. And one of the reasons that people like me who were friendly to the Chinese before going there, but who suddenly went mad with them and told to them, we don't want to deal with you anymore, is that we Muslims who were there witnessed a religious genocide and an ethnic genocide against these people. And as you can understand, even by the introduction that you made for me, is that, I mean, I'm not some American paid guy who went there and who worked for the BBC or CNN or whatever and who wanted to defame China. My intention was good. And my advice to our Chinese friends, look, I use the term Chinese friends. Some Uyghurs get mad with me when I use the term friends. I use the term friends because I still want to keep open the channels of communication with them. But I told them, what you are doing is wrong. I mean, what you are doing is what Hitler was doing with the Jews during Second World War. You cannot persecute people because they are not from your ethnic or religious group. In my articles that I wrote for Daily Sabah in Turkey, I told to our Chinese friends, if you really want the Uyghurs to behave with you, because they are afraid from Uyghurs from the separatist point of view, because there are many Uyghurs who say we don't want to stay with China, we want to create our East Turkestan Republic. What I told to our Chinese friends is that if you want these people to be friendly with you, you have to treat them as equal citizens. You should not persecute these people because they're Muslim or because they're Turkic people. You cannot turn the Uyghurs into Chinese. I told them the policies that you are doing here are policies of the 19th and 20th century. The last psychopath who did such policies in Europe was Hitler. Hitler wanted to assimilate and to Germanize everyone. Hitler wanted to Germanize the Jews because he was obsessed with the fact that Jews, because of their religion, they were never assimilating. So what Xi Jinping is doing nowadays, he is trying to copy Hitler, but the Communist Party of China and China's People's Republic, they claim to be communists, and communism does not stand for what they're doing. Nazism and fascism does that. But the problem with the Chinese government that they have, and my experience differently from many other people, which is academic, is firsthand, is that the Chinese, they think that they are too strong, and that they think that they can crush the Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other Turkic people who live in Xinjiang. They think that they can forcefully assimilate them, forcefully turn them into Buddhists or atheists and Chinese, can force them to eat pork and renounce their culture and tradition. And what they told me when I was there, that they told me we should have done this since 1980s. They regretted that they didn't do this kind of cultural genocide and religious genocide against Uyghurs before. And they think that they can assimilate the Uyghurs now. They are now trying in an industrial scale to destroy more than 20 million people, to destroy their ethnic identity and their religion. And this is horrible. This is horrible, and I'm very upset why only the West speaks about it, why the imperialist American government speaks about it. And much of the Muslim Ummah, with exceptions of countries like Turkey or Qatar, are speaking up. And this is really, really sad, it's unimaginable.
Thank you, Dr. Olsi. Could you, I remember watching some of your interviews and the videos you posted on your YouTube channel explaining your trip. And you had mentioned that before you went to the concentration camps, you had a pretty good impression of what you saw. You didn't think it was that bad. But as soon as you mentioned one of the later days, they finally took you to what China calls as these vocational training centers, and you saw a starker reality. Could you give a little bit of details on what you saw?
Yes, before visiting the concentration camps, especially when we were in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, there was a sister here who told me we call it East Turkestan. I know, sister, you call it East Turkestan, but when I speak, I don't speak only for Uyghurs, I speak for the international communities. And many people know East Turkestan as Xinjiang, so I hope you don't mind why I use this term. It doesn't mean to insult your identity. So coming back to your question, when we went to Urumqi, we were really shocked and impressed by the massive development of Urumqi and massive development of China. Urumqi looks much better than Toronto, and you cannot even compare it with Montreal in Canada, which is in a horrible situation. And economy was good, people were working. I mean, China is a totalitarian state, and the Communist Party of China does miracles because you don't have democracy and human rights there. So when the Chinese want to do miracles, they do it. That's why they are even much more powerful probably than us in the West. And so first we were impressed with the development, and I mean, people like me who went there to investigate and understand what is going on with our Muslim brothers of East Turkestan, we said, what the hell? I mean, life is good, economy was good, life was prosperous, new building, and everything was fine. Because we were foreigners, we didn't understand what was going on underground. But when we were given lectures by our Communist Party officials, and when we saw their official racism and Islamophobia and Turkophobia and Arabophobia, and when we started visiting their state museums, and in their state museums, the Chinese historians, they were depicting Buddhism as the original religion and Confucianism of China, but they were showing Islam as a foreign and a violent religion, then we started to understand that, hold on a second, things are not very good in here, because we're having a state official Islamophobia. But still, people like me were willing to tolerate that, because after all, we have Islamophobia throughout the world. Trump is an Islamophobe. We have many fascists and Islamophobes in Europe. Here in Albania, our prime minister is an Islamophobe. So, I mean, journalists like me, they were willing to, okay, tolerate what was going on and saying, okay, we have Islamophobia throughout the world. So what the heck? But the thing that changed our mind totally, and mine especially, and of my Turkish friend, who was working for Anadolu agency, Bayram Altuğ, and for our Pakistani and Bangladeshi and Arab friends, was when we visited the concentration camps. The Chinese were telling to us that we're suffering from terrorism. We have some Uyghur terrorists who are killing us around. And for a person like me who deals a lot with extremist Muslim organizations, I write articles, I investigate how Muslims of Balkans were radicalized by Americans and our government, and they were sent to do jihad in Syria. Or we have the Iranian MEK, Mujahideen al-Halq terrorist organization being hosted here in Albania. So I said, okay, maybe the Chinese are fighting this Islamic Turkestan party, which is part of Daesh or ISIS in Syria. And I said, okay, let's have a look what the Chinese are doing. But when we visited the vocational training centers or the concentration camps, we saw that these people, they were not terrorists. We were expecting to find suicide bombers. We were expecting to find psychopaths inside these centers. But what we found a lady who was sent to a concentration camp only because she wanted to live halal life and eat halal food. We saw another person who was sent to this concentration camp only because he had prayed to God in a public space, and he didn't have a license to pray to God. Because in Xinjiang, for you to pray to Allah, you need to have a government approval. We found a lady who was sent in this concentration camp only because she put hijab. We found a lady who was sent to this concentration camp only because she had read the Quran and had read the Quran to her mother. So when we saw these people, we told to our Chinese friends, what the heck? Are these the terrorists and the extremists that you are claiming to fight? And they said, yes. But I told them, and probably you have one of this conversation in one of my videos. I told them, but these people, they're not terrorists. They haven't done anything wrong. But they say, no, they have done a crime. And what is their crime? Because they made a nikah, they told us, a religious marriage. And I told them, but excuse me, from the world where we come, this is a basic human rights. And they told us, no, this is a crime because it is against the law. But I told them, this is not a law. This is a criminal law. Where are the human rights in here? How you can send people to jail, to concentration camp, and even brainwash them? Because, sister, believe me, Guantanamo, where the Americans sent the Taliban after 9/11, is much better than these concentration camps of China. Why? Because Americans abducted people throughout the world and threw them in Guantanamo, and we know their story, they were tortured, etc. But nobody prohibited these people from praying to Allah. But in the concentration camps of Xinjiang, you are not allowed even to mention Allah. You have to shout many times a day, long live Xi Jinping. And probably if you have seen all my interviews, when I start interviewing these people, there was a lady, her name was
Aisha?
No, Aisha, there was another lady, and she was sent to this concentration camp only because she had put a headscarf and had made a religious marriage ceremony with her husband. So she was sent because she was a Muslim. And now when I asked her, are you a Muslim? She was telling me no, and I was shocked. I told her, how come? You came here because you believed in Allah. But now, no, she said, I was mistaken. And I asked her, but what do you believe now? And she said, I believe in science and in the Communist Party of China. So what we understood that the Chinese were doing with and these people were not one or two, they were millions. One of the Chinese lectures that we had, he told us, because we told him how many Uyghurs you have in these concentration camps, because in the West we speak for 1 to 2 to 3 million. He told me, no, that number is exaggerated. We should have around 500,000. So can you imagine? They admitted to us that they have 500,000 Muslims in these concentration camps who are abducted from their homes. Only and in my videos, I have documented to the world and to the Chinese and to the Americans and to everybody who hates or loves me what is really going on. So if you are to live now in this moment in Xinjiang, if you don't want to end up in a concentration camp, and you are not a Han Chinese, because this persecution is directed against the Turkic Indo-European inhabitants of East Turkestan. So if you don't want to end up in concentration camp in these moments, you should eat pork, you should curse God, you should never speak your language, you should mix with the Chinese, you should be more loyal to the Communist Party of China than Xi Jinping is, in order to save your skin. But if you have the slightest idea that you are an Uyghur, that you have a history, I mean, some of these people that I interviewed, they were sent to these concentration camps only because they had read on their smartphones the history of East Turkestan, or because they have read on the internet that a true Muslim should pray to Allah 5 times a day. So for us who are living now in lockdown, especially here in Albania, and we're having, the world is becoming a bigger China, we're copying the Chinese, and we're having our government tracing us through our smartphones, etc. The situation in Xinjiang was horrible. The Chinese were checking everything, and they were using artificial intelligence, and you had cameras everywhere. It was a massive police state. It was horrible.
Thank you, Dr. Olsi. I found I'm trying to picture a lot of, combining the videos that I saw. And for those who are interested, you can go to Olsi's YouTube channel and see a lot of the footage that he took when inside these camps. He shows these detainees being forced to dance and sing and pretending like they're having a quote unquote happy life. We would love to have further discussion further, but unfortunately we're getting close on time, and we want to further discussion and talk about other aspects of this issue. So thank you again, Dr. Olsi, for explaining and really shedding light on your experience and the way your views had changed through this trip and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and Ms. Louisam, I have some questions for you, in regards to the work you've done, and you've been, working with the National Endowment for Democracy and really working on the ground to address this issue for some time. You've even been to East Turkestan, and so I wanted to ask you, what is the level of government involvement you have seen on addressing the Uyghur issue, and where do you think it's been going so far?
Yes, thank you so much. I want to give credit to the European Parliament and also some members of the U.S. Congress for stepping out and publicly condemning these horrible crimes that Dr. Olsi has just described. And in addition, certain government officials, you have good quotes from some officials from Germany, from London, from UK, from the US, some Turkish foreign ministry, who have expressed their outrage. And there it ends. So activist groups have had to file a petition in London to stop the import of cotton goods from China that might be made by Uyghur forced labor. It's a long, long slog, and truly for Uyghurs, it feels like being abandoned to this horrific machine of oppression without real action on the part of those who are in power in every government in the world.
Thank you. Can you comment on the U.S. governmental involvement and kind of like the progression of the legislation that we've been seeing with the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, and then now we have the introduction of the Forced Labor Prevention Act that was introduced in March. So could you comment and give some insight into those and what has been the status of that?
Yes, it's very good news. Just yesterday, it was confirmed that the U.S. Senate will be has putting up for a vote this coming week the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. And that's just very good news because it'll be the first concrete legislation by a parliament or legislature anywhere in the world. And the understanding is that as a democratic process, this will need to go back to the House of Representatives and then go to the president's desk. And once it's passed, it will mean that the U.S. now has an officially legislated policy, and there will be reports created by government agencies that will enable the Congress to take further action. And this is a concrete manifestation of something where individual officials once in a while in a speech will condemn what's going on, but without ever having any policy levers. I will say that UHRP just last week issued a press release welcoming camp survivors to the US. So in that sense, behind the scenes, the US government has made it possible for a few survivors, very few survivors of this horrific experience who managed to get out of China. They have arranged for humanitarian parole for them to reach the United States. So that's one action that is a good thing. And we hope governments everywhere will give safe refuge for those people who are forced to flee or who are otherwise stateless.
Thank you. Could you also comment on quickly what exactly would these forms of legislation be doing, like the main sources of change that we would like to see from these bills that hopefully, if they get passed, we see, and also talking briefly on exactly what have you seen as the most effective, or some of the most effective means that people can do from their homes, because you've been involved in advocacy and activism for some time now, and I'm sure you have an idea of like what is more effective, what's more, now, because people, I feel like even when they're from their homes, they feel like they want to still be productive, they want to do things that actually make a change beyond just raising awareness. Of course, raising awareness is super important, but I want to see what your perspective is given your experience.
Great question. There are currently 4 online petitions that are not just clicktivism. Oh, I signed my name, but that's nothing. So I'll mention them: avaz.org and the Freedom United, which is, again, to deal with this forced labor question. Every consumer who buys something that's made of cotton, the chances are this cotton, if it's imported from China, it means it actually comes from the Uyghur region where there is widespread forced labor. The detention, indoctrination, forced renunciation of religion, and then placement in a closed factory environment, still away from family, still away from children, still not allowed to use Uyghur, not allowed to pray, and forced to work and locked up there. And those products are coming into our grocery stores on the shelves of Walmart and Gap and H&M and IKEA and Uniqlo and Muji. And so it's just an outrage. So people shouldn't buy those products. They should sign these petitions that ask the governments to act and stop allowing the import that these companies can profit from Uyghurs and Kazakh and Uzbek forced labor. And I'd love to help you share on the website here afterwards the actual links to those petitions. And for Americans, absolutely, please contact your senator to ask them to support the Forced Labor Protection Act.
Thank you. And for those who are interested further, you guys could go to saveuyghur.org, SAVEUIGHUR.org/Congress. On the website, we have multiple tools and resources that you can access directly that and to carry out the actions that Louisa mentioned. And we have the links to the reports on forced labor. There's a newly released report called Uyghur for Sale by the Australian Policy Strategic Institute that really sheds light on dozens of companies that we honestly purchase from all the time. And it's really, for me as an Uyghur American, like it was shocking to see that many companies being complicit in this genocide. So thank you, Louisa, for that. And also, Brother Mehmet, somebody asked in the questions on the Q&A, what in your mind would be the appropriate response from the Muslim world?
Thank you. Not for the Muslim world, we know for sure that they are not only voicing any concern, at the same time they are becoming more and more complicit to Chinese crime against humanity and against Uyghurs by closely working and supporting the Chinese government's policy. So this is outrageous. And especially we have to mention this during the holy months of Ramadan. Not only individual states, at the same time, Islamic Cooperation Organization, they are supporting. They are the largest the bloc of countries that are currently supporting the Chinese de-Islamization policy under the pretext of fighting against terrorism. So this is one concern, and we have to more communicate with them. Actually, we are trying to do that, and in many Muslim countries, they basically close the door. They are not given any response for our request to meet or give them update and brief them about the situation. This is one of the sad area, and most of the Uyghurs are feeling really, really bad, and especially the behavior of betrayal from the Muslim communities and the Muslim, not only just, I have to say, Muslim countries, Muslim states, not the Muslim communities, and many Muslim communities are supporting. And at the same time, we have to remember this, and some Western countries, they are condemning, and they are frequently forcing Chinese government to change current behavior. But at the same time, our markets are open for Chinese companies, and our pension fund is funneling the Chinese market. And we are also, as a Westerners or a citizen of Western countries, we are also, this way or that way, complacent to Chinese crime against Uyghurs. Because when you buy the shopping mall, as Louisa mentioned, and all shelves are full of products that made by forced labor of our brothers, and Samsung and Apple and BMW and just more than 83 companies now identified by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Actually, it's more. And now just because there is a demand from the Western market, and more Uyghurs now transferred from concentration camps to Chinese facilities across the country to produce those products. And the recent open source Chinese media news shows that Chinese government gave the quotas to more than 19 provinces and dozens of major Chinese cities to accept minimum number of 50,000 Uyghurs. That means it is more than 1 million in addition to current existing numbers. So this is the massive displacement of one ethnic group from their cultural and the religious and the ethnic environment, separation and of families. It is just shattered communities. This is not only the massive displacement. Those Uyghurs who transferred to mainland Chinese factories and prisons, they are living under semi-military control. And that indoctrination, copied from concentration camp, that mental and physical torture from the concentration camp are still going on for those Uyghurs who transferred to mainland China. So given the scale and the scope of this atrocity, we haven't seen that strong reaction from international community. And there are some concerns and verbal expression or condemnation. Except this proposed legislation, we haven't seen any concrete action to stop this Chinese madness. And the Chinese doing business with our market. And 70–80% of the Chinese financial power are coming from the Western market. And so we have to do more. And this is not only the job for exiled Uyghurs. This is the duty of entire humanity if we want to stop this horrendous crime that is unfolding.
Thank you.
Can I add something, Aydin?
Yes. And I realize that question was also directed towards you, so if you have anything to add to that question.
I mean, I've written a number of articles. I think 2 or 3 should have been in English, directed to the Muslim Ummah. about what we can do about the Uyghur issue or the Muslims of East Turkestan. Now, the thing is, there are a number of issues here. Number one, there is a massive ignorance in the Muslim world about the Uyghurs.
Yes.
Number two is that we have many authoritarian and dictatorial regimes in the Muslim world who they perceive China as an ally, they need to use China to balance American hegemony, imperialism, and invasion. But in my opinion, the Muslim civil society in the Muslim countries can help a lot. But I think even when it comes to the Uyghur activists who live in the West, they need to be more Islamic friendly in their declarations and even in your productions. For example, now we are living in the era of coronavirus. In many countries, we have our mosques closed. We have to produce videos to Muslim communities throughout the world and tell them, how do you feel when you cannot go to mosque? And we should tell them, we in East Turkestan, we are not allowed to go to mosques since 10 years. We are in lockdown like you guys are. There is another issue that there are some Uyghurs who, with their declarations sometimes, they express Turkophobic or Islamophobic views. And this doesn't go very well with the Muslim Ummah. And there is also another problem, because this is a response to the question that I had, what the Muslim world can do. Many Muslims, and I'm talking from an Islamic perspective here, I'm a Muslim, I'm not an Uyghur, so I'm talking to you from the background of the Muslim world. So many Muslims, when they see top US officials talking about the Uyghur issue, they are suspicious, like I was before going to East Turkestan, and they say, okay, maybe this is some kind of an American trick. Now, how we can break this thing is by being more active with the Muslim Ummah. I've gone to Turkey, and in Turkey there is a massive support for the Uyghurs, but there are many Turks who see some Uyghurs, especially in the West, who insult them, insult Turkish government, and they say, okay, we're trying to help these people, but they're not thankful to us. I've gone to Qatar, I've spoken to Al Jazeera about the Uyghurs, but we need to do more. And on the other hand, we have some governments, like in the United Arab Emirates or Saudi government, who they refuse to speak about the Uyghur issue. When we were in East Turkestan, we had journalists from Saudi Arabia and from United Arab Emirates, who they didn't report anything. And we had some Muslim sisters with hijab who they were crying when they were seeing what the Chinese were doing to their Muslim sisters in East Turkestan. And but I told them, are you going to write anything about this when you go back to your countries? They told us no. So for these regimes in Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, who are in a way controlled and influenced by the US administration, we have to ask the Americans to ask them to speak more about the Uyghurs. On the other hand, you, the Uyghur activists who are in the West, you have to be more mindful about addressing the Muslim world. I do understand that in this moment, the Americans, for their political interests, are backing the Uyghur issue, and this is a very good thing for you. But you have to know something, that for as long as the Muslim world doesn't stand up and they don't tell to China, stop what you are doing, the Chinese will be fine with that. The Chinese imperialist project, which is even sacrificing the Uyghurs, one road and one belt, the network of highways that the Chinese are building throughout Central Asia and Muslim countries, is the plan B that the Chinese have for fighting against the Americans in case the West will put some kind of embargo or anything against the Chinese in China's Sea. But we need to make the Muslim Ummah to stand up, but we have to explain to them, because the thing with the Muslim world is that the Chinese, number one, spend so much money, so much disinformation campaign. They take Muslim journalists and diplomats and give them very good money when they send them to China. And the thing is, we cannot, and the people in the Muslim world do not really know what is going on. People are like me, who we see images of suffering Uyghurs, but we think maybe these are fake images. So we have to do a lot of social activism and to work with the civil society, with Muslim countries from Indonesia up to Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Iran up to Kazakhstan, and to explain to the Muslim ulamas, to the Muslim believers and civil society organizations what is going on.
Thank you. And you mentioned how, one of the things is the main problems is the massive ignorance throughout the world, even especially within the Muslim world. I can attest to seeing part of that. Even I had visited Palestine last year, and you mentioned how when you went to Palestine, there was, you realize that the situation is much worse in East Turkestan. But when I was in Palestine, I was curious to see, who was aware about what was happening. Throughout all the Palestinians I had spoken with, I had spoken to a few dozen people, and only one or two people had heard about what was happening in East Turkestan. And I was telling them, we were saying, there is a population that is experiencing, really horrific conditions, and that you are not alone. And I told them, and I asked them if they knew about the Uyghur people. They had absolutely no idea. They had never heard of who the Uyghur people were, what East Turkestan was. And then I went on kind of a little, educational 5-minute thing, but like it was ultimately really sad to see that, because I was like, wow, if people in Palestine don't even know, then how much more education, like I was just trying to imagine how much more awareness needs to be taking place in order for there to be even global like solidarity between these oppressed populations.
Sorry to interrupt, there is even something else. When I was in Ramallah in December 2018, I went to the foreign ministry of the Palestinian Authority. It was a new building. They had paved roads in Ramallah. And I asked Palestinian officials, who built for you this foreign ministry and the roads? And the answer was China. Yeah. Do you understand? It is very difficult to break this connection between the Arab and Muslim world and China. Because while the Chinese, they are killing their own Muslims, they are forcefully de-Islamizing them. They are hiding what they're doing because they're very skillful on hiding what they're doing. On the other hand, look, I mean, how can I talk to the Palestinian foreign ministry to speak against China when China begs them at the United Nations against Americans and Israel? When China has built their ministry, when China sometimes even pays their salaries, because I asked them, they told me sometimes Chinese even pay our salaries. So it is very complicated. And here comes the US administration, which is very wrong in its policies with the Muslim world. Because if we would have had a president like Obama, probably in USA, who was more friendly to Muslim Ummah, our situation would have been much more easier.
So that leads to the question, and somebody asked, how can American Muslims put pressure on countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Pakistan, and all these other Muslim countries that are really so strategically and politically tied to China? What would you say? And this question goes to anyone in the panel.
Let me jump in. Actually, a Muslim organization, the Uyghur organizations have been trying very hard to reach out those Muslim countries and their representatives and the communities. And the Muslim countries, their official representatives always keeping their distance from the Uyghur organizations, not only in local area, just like in Canada or United States, in the United Nations and some other international settlements. So it is not up to for Uyghur organizations or Uyghur communities. And so Uyghurs send number of delegations from the community to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to United Arab Emirates, and Malaysia, Indonesia, to talk with the civil society and the government officials just to brief them. Here, just we have to call it with proper terminology. China is extending bread to those Islamic countries, conditional to eat that bread with making Uyghur blood as a sauce. Basically, those Muslim countries are eating Chinese bread with the source of Uyghur blood. And they are reluctant to listen it because of the less of the freedom in the press and some other less of transparency and autocratic government. So it is not only up to the Uyghurs. And secondly, most of the Muslim countries, using China as a leverage against so-called Western imperialism or American hegemony. And so those countries are seeing China as a key player in their balancing power. So then this, in this context, the Uyghurs are being victimized. And most of the Muslim countries, we approached at the United Nations and some other organizations. They don't want to listen. They don't want to listen. We are telling them the Quran is being burned and the mosques are demolished, this and that, Islam is banned. No, they don't want to approach to us. Even they don't want to give their 5 times their time just to explain what is going on. So we have to probably, the best way to go with the grassroots organizations of Muslim communities across the world and explain to them first. And probably there will be an opportunity to influence their government's decision. And this is the most the difficult area we are experiencing right now as a Uyghur organization, just to have an opportunity to talk with the Muslim officials and Muslim countries, even with the Islamic Cooperation Organization.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. But we have multiple comments and questions online right now. So we will be responding to questions with particular links that people are asking for that Louisa had mentioned, and any other resources that people can access to further this cause. If you guys have any further comments or concerns, you guys can please leave it in the comments below. And next time we will hope to address it. Justice for All has its new online TV show that you guys can start broadcasting and watching to see more of our projects and more of our topics that we are talking about. We also have, with this conference, panels on India, Kashmir, and Burma. So for those who are interested, please do sign up and continue going live with us. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for your insights and your expertise. This was a great discussion, and we hope to have you guys again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Rahmat.
Happy Ramadan.
Ramadan Kareem.